Health in Wildlife, Understanding Literature and Stakeholder Perspectives. Today's wildlife face a lot of challenges. These include things like habitat fragmentation and loss, human impact, invasive species, pollution, climate change, and disease. Yet animals can be resilient or vulnerable to challenges. Some species will actually do better as a result of these changes, but others do not. For example, the Fowler's toe population is threatened due to habitat loss and degradation, but this family of raccoons will probably do better living in close proximity to humans. So understanding which wild animal populations are healthy and able to withstand challenges and which are vulnerable is essential for wildlife conservation. Yet health can be viewed in very different ways. The concept of human health has really evolved over time. Historically, it was viewed as the absence of disease. Then in 1948, the World Health Organization defined it as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Eventually, more modern concepts came into favor, like population health and health as the result of interacting social, ecological, and physical determinants, and also health as the ability to adapt or cope with challenges. And then in food animal medicine, health can also be seen as the production of a commodity, such as meat or milk. In wildlife, there's really a concern that we're stuck looking at health as the absence of disease. Even though there are so many different ways to view health, it's a concept that really permeates all sorts of documents like legislation and policy, literature, strategic plans, and goals. For example, the Migratory Birds Convention Act dictates that we sustain healthy migratory bird populations for harvesting needs. And then this is the white-tailed deer management policy for Ontario, and it has the objective of promoting a healthy deer population. Because of all this, I spent my PhD looking at wildlife health, and I'm going to share the findings from two of the chapters. For these chapters, I looked at how health is used and viewed, firstly in the literature and then by different stakeholders. So the first chapter was a scoping literature review. We searched the literature for the terms wildlife health and wild animal health, and we pulled three pieces of information from each paper. The first being the context in which health was used. So this was based on the language as well as the methodologies, research goals, and objectives of the authors. And then, based on reviewing health literature from other fields, we found 6 other non-mutually exclusive ways in which health is commonly used. So then the papers were then searched for these different contexts. And then the last thing was that all the papers were examined to see if health was explicitly measured in the paper, and if so, how. So for context of health, these were the main ones. So health is the absence of disease. This is health as a dichotomous concept. Animals are either healthy or they're diseased. Multifactorial, so health is the result of the interaction of 2 or more factors. Those factors could be anything. They could be climate, they could be stress, they could be anything. And then health as an unclear context. So this was people who talked about health in a way that was really vague or inconsistent. So in terms of contexts of health that are used in other fields, these are the 6 that we came up with. The first being population health. So this health approach looks at the entire range of factors that determine health and uses strategies that are designed to affect an entire population. Determinants of health. So this is health as the result of interacting biologic, social, and environmental factors. Psychosocial phenomenon of well-being. So this is a health approach that looks at the influence of social and psychological factors. Coping capacity. Health is the ability to respond to environmental stressors and survive. Herd health. So this is an approach where we set health targets, we monitor, do problem analysis, and follow up. And then productivity, health as the production of a commodity. So of the papers that we went through, the majority looked at health as the absence of disease, and that was 56%. The context was not clear for 37%, and then the remaining papers, which was only 7% of them, classified health as a multifactorial context. And this context was consistently less than 10% of the papers throughout the 20 years, and it really didn't change over time. And then in terms of contexts of health that are used in other fields, so population health, coping capacity, and productivity were contexts that were used in our papers, but not very often. And so in our papers, 93 of them explicitly said that they measured health. And in these 93 papers, we found 20 different categories of ways to measure health. And so as you can see, there was really a lot of variation here. So the wildlife literature mostly uses and discusses health as the absence of disease. It uses some health context from other fields, but not often. And it measures health in a wide variety of ways. So despite the changes in how we define and use health in the human health field, we still really define and use health as the absence of disease in the literature of the wildlife health field. The variation in the techniques used to measure health really makes it difficult to interpret any single measurement and also to compare between populations. So the findings really argued for authors to provide explicit definitions and criteria for measuring health in their papers, and probably for the wildlife health community to strive for more of a shared vision of what health is. So the wildlife health community is made up of people working in different professions and for different institutions. These people have really different educational backgrounds. They use different terminology and they have different goals. It's unknown how different wildlife experts conceptualize wildlife health, or if people within the same field even conceptualize it in a similar way. So for the second chapter, we used qualitative methods and we did focus groups with a number of different stakeholders. And so for the results of this, the one sort of big finding was that there was no shared definition of wildlife health, not even within a single stakeholder group. And we really came up with 4 main themes in the results, and I will share these with you in some more detail. So for the first theme, it's called multiple interacting factors. So everyone discussed a wide variety of factors that determine wildlife health. But some people tended to focus more on certain factors, and people's opinions were at times really conflicting. So one participant said, we might or might not be able to agree on what health is, but we could probably agree on the things that contribute to it. So given that all the types of stakeholders described wildlife health as this multifactorial outcome that is affected by many factors, agreeing on the factors that contribute to health could serve as a common ground for people. One participant said, a famous story about a huge female black bear. She was the biggest female I'd ever handled in a den, and she had 3 legs. She had lost it at the elbow in a snare, and she kept pumping out cubs every 2 years. And then the moderator says, would you still consider her to be healthy? Well, depends how you measure. If health was based on number of intact limbs, then she was 0.75. But if it was based on reproductive outputs, she's extraordinarily healthy. So people talked about seeing health differently depending on the context, the time scale, geographic scale, and level at which it's being judged. The context used to judge health really depended on the goals and the values and beliefs of the person judging health. And these views were personal and could definitely be contradictory both between and within the groups. So in terms of scale, for time scale, people said that a judgment of health could look at present health, or it could take into consideration a forecast for any number of years into the future. So someone says, what time frame are we interested in defining? You can't expect populations or individuals to be resistant ad infinitum. And in terms of geographic scale, people talked about sort of the classic metapopulation, where population could be doing poorly in one geographic area, while at the same time it could be doing well in another. But if you looked at the sort of larger population as a whole, they might be doing just fine. So someone says, it depends how big a scale you're looking at. If we wiped out raccoons here, but they continue to grow as pests in Japan, is their population healthy? Then people talked about the fact that health needs to be judged based on a level, and that level could be the individual animal, it could be a population, it could be an ecosystem, and it could probably go out from there. So someone says, the cormorant population, people would say, is a really healthy population, right? But it's destroying the fish population, so is that healthy? Measuring health. So all focus groups identified many factors that can be used to measure wildlife health. And there were 4 main key elements to this theme. The first being that all the measurements may not coincide. So given that there are so many factors that can be assessed, all of these factors may not coincide. An example given was white-tailed deer. The animals are probably smaller than they used to be, but there are a lot more of them. The second thing is that any single measurement cannot indicate health. For example, just because a population has a high abundance, this population is not necessarily healthy, as it could also have high levels of disease or low levels of resources or anything else wrong with it. The third thing being that health is a continuum, so it's not present as a yes or no thing, but it's always somewhere in between. This is true both within an individual animal and within the larger population, because a healthy population will still have sick animals within it. The last thing is that there are aspects of health that are really hard to measure. An example given was the emotional state of an animal. It's probably really important, but we can't measure it. And so then the last theme that people talked about was this ability to cope and or adapt to challenges. So one participant said that some species seem to be able to track climate, others seem to not. At this point, does it make one more healthy than the other? Maybe not, but it will in the future. If they can adapt or migrate, we call them healthy. So people in all groups saw resilience and the ability to cope and or adapt to challenge as being a really important part of wildlife health. So there are 3 main takeaway messages from this chapter. The first being that there is no shared definition of wildlife health, not even within a single group. And this is important because we keep using this word, but we all have different ideas of what it means. The second thing is that despite the differences, we found a great number of similarities in how people conceptualize health and wildlife. And these commonalities could really help bridge the gap between the different professions. The last thing is that a judgment of whether something is healthy or unhealthy depends on what healthy is, which depends on the context and scale used by the evaluator, which depends on that person's goals, values, and beliefs. Therefore, we need to be explicit in both a definition of health and in how the things that we measure relate to that definition. And this would really improve communication and understanding for everyone. Thank you.